A black vetter mechanic fixes a Hell's Angels bike and gets fired. What happens next will shock everyone. Before we dive into this incredible story of integrity and unexpected reward, we'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below and let's see how far this message of kindness can travel. The cold was a living thing in Havenwood. It seeped through the cinder block walls of Thorne's Auto and Repair, a ravenous predator hunting for the last vestiges of warmth. Elias Thorne felt it in his bones, a deep, persistent ache that had become as much a part of him as the grease permanently etched into the lines of his hands. He blew on his knuckles, the small cloud of his breath a fleeting ghost in the cavernous garage. The single fluorescent light strip above the main bay flickered, a dying heartbeat casting long, dancing shadows that made the familiar shapes of tools and hoists seem monstrous and strange. It was a perfect reflection of his hope, sputtering, unreliable, and close to giving out entirely. Elias was a good man, forged in the crucible of 2 tours overseas and tempered by the quiet grief of losing his wife, Sarah, to an illness that had stolen her light and his savings with equal cruelty. All he had left was this garage, a legacy from his father, and a code of conduct that felt laughably obsolete in a world that valued profit over principle. The garage was failing. A stack of crimson-lettered envelopes on his small, cluttered desk served as a constant, screaming reminder. The bank owned the tools, the property owner wanted him out, and the town of Havenwood, with its polite smiles and tightly drawn curtains, had long since decided where its loyalties lay. It wasn't with the quiet, solitary black man who kept to himself and charged too little for his honest work. He ran a hand over his weary face, the rough scrape of his palm against his stubble a familiar sound in the oppressive silence. His gaze fell on the small, silver-framed photograph on the desk, the glass smudged with his fingerprints. Sarah, smiling, her eyes full of a life that felt a universe away. "Just one more day, honey," he whispered to the picture. "Just gotta get through one more day." That was when the sound began. It started as a low, guttural rumble on the edge of hearing, a vibration felt more in the chest than in the ears. It grew steadily, a gathering storm of synchronized thunder that rattled the cheap glass in the garage's windows. Elias straightened up, his mechanic's instincts kicking in. That wasn't the sound of a local farmer's pickup or a teenager's souped-up sedan. It was the sound of heavy, powerful machines, a sound that Havenwood hadn't heard in years. He moved to the front door, wiping a clear circle on the grimy pane with the sleeve of his coveralls. The sight made his breath catch. A phalanx of motorcycles, at least a dozen of them, was pulling into his gravel lot. They were large, chrome-laden beasts, and the men who rode them were cut from the same cloth. They wore worn leather cuts adorned with patches that the townspeople would only recognize from sensationalized news reports. The emblem was stark, a coiled serpent, fangs bared, wrapped around a broken gear. The Iron Serpents. They weren't just a riding club. They were a one-percenter organization, a name whispered with a mixture of fear and morbid fascination. The town of Havenwood held its collective breath. Curtains twitched. Doors were quietly locked. This was the kind of trouble that decent folk avoided. The kind of trouble that Elias, with his mountain of debt and precarious existence, could not possibly afford. The lead rider swung his leg over his bike. He was a mountain of a man, with a thick, graying beard and eyes that seemed to have seen the whole world and found it wanting. He walked not with a swagger, but with the heavy, deliberate tread of a man who never had to prove his own authority. He stopped in front of the garage door, his presence alone a challenge. His eyes met Elias's through the glass, and in that moment, a choice was presented. Elias could lock the door, turn off the flickering light, and pretend he wasn't there. It would be the smart thing to do, the safe thing. It was what the entire town was already doing. But Elias Thorne was not a man built for the safe choice. He was a man built on a foundation of duty and honor. He saw a broken-down motorcycle, a stranded traveler, and a problem he was uniquely qualified to solve. He took a deep breath, turned the deadbolt, and pulled the door open, letting the biting wind and the weight of the world rush in. The man's gaze was intense, scanning Elias from head to toe. Elias met it without flinching. "We're closed," Elias said, his voice calm and even, though his heart was hammering against his ribs. The big man grunted, a sound like stones grinding together. He gestured with a thumb back toward his motorcycle, a magnificent, custom-built machine that was clearly the pride of the fleet. "She's running rough, losing power. The storm's coming in hard behind us. Need to get her right." It wasn't a question or a request. It was a statement of fact. This was the test. Elias could feel it. Every instinct for self-preservation screamed at him to refuse, to make an excuse, to point them down the road to the next town. His landlord, Mr. Henderson, a man whose prejudice was as vast as his property holdings, had been explicit. "I don't want that kind of element around here, Thorne. You run a clean shop, or you don't run a shop at all." The iron serpents were the very definition of that kind of element. Helping them would be a betrayal of Henderson's unspoken, yet crystal-clear terms. It would be professional suicide. Elias looked past the giant leader at the other men. They sat on their bikes, silent, watching. They weren't menacing, not exactly. They were waiting, patient. Like predators, yes, but also like soldiers waiting for a command. He saw the fatigue in their posture, the road dust caked on their leather and steel. He saw men who were a long way from home. Then he looked at the motorcycle. His mechanic's eye took over, pushing aside the fear and the financial calculations. He saw the craftsmanship, the love that had gone into every weld, every polished piece of chrome. The bike wasn't just a machine. It was a piece of its rider's soul. To a man like Elias, who understood the language of metal and oil, that was a sacred thing. To deny it care would be a violation of his own deeply held beliefs. It would be like a doctor refusing to treat a patient. He let out a slow breath, the cold air stinging his lungs. "Push it in," he said, stepping back and holding the door wide. "Let's have a look." A ripple of surprise, almost imperceptible, passed through the bikers. The leader, who called himself Breaker, gave a curt nod. He and another man wheeled the heavy machine into the garage, its weight groaning on the concrete floor. The others dismounted but remained outside, forming a silent, leather-clad perimeter. They were disciplined, professional. This wasn't some chaotic gang. It was an organization. Elias closed the door, shutting out the wind and the prying eyes of Havenwood. The garage, which had felt so empty and cold, was now charged with a tense, focused energy. The flickering light seemed to cast Breaker in stark relief, making him look like a figure from some ancient saga. "What's the problem?" Elias asked, his voice all business now. He was in his element. "Started sputtering about 20 miles back," Breaker explained. "Felt like she was starving for fuel. Changed the plugs, checked the lines. Nothing obvious." Elias nodded, grabbing a wrench and a flashlight. He didn't ask for payment up front. He didn't lay out terms. He simply got to work. His hands, though cold, were steady and sure. They moved with an economy of motion that spoke of thousands of hours spent in the guts of engines. He checked the fuel filter first, then the carburetor. He listened to the bike, his head cocked to the side as if it were speaking a language only he could understand. Breaker watched him, his arms crossed over his massive chest. He didn't hover or interfere. He watched with the critical eye of a man who knew his machine intimately. He recognized Elias's skill immediately. It was in the confident turn of a screw, the precise tap of a hammer, the gentle probing of a wire. "You're good," Breaker stated. It was a simple observation, devoid of flattery. "I manage," Elias replied, not looking up. As he worked, the silence stretched, filled only by the metallic clicks and scrapes of his tools. To break the tension, and because it was the decent thing to do, Elias gestured with his head toward the small, sputtering coffee pot in the corner office. "There's coffee. What's left of it. Help yourself." This, more than agreeing to do the work, seemed to truly surprise the biker. Breaker's stern expression softened for a fraction of a second. He walked over to the office, poured the last of the sludgy coffee into 2 stained ceramic mugs, and brought one back to Elias, setting it down on a clean rag beside him. It was a simple gesture of reciprocity, a quiet acknowledgement of the kindness offered. They drank in silence for a moment, two men from entirely different worlds, sharing a moment of warmth in a cold, judgmental world. Elias found the problem. A tiny, almost invisible crack in the intake manifold boot, causing a vacuum leak. It was the kind of thing a lesser mechanic would miss, chasing ghosts in the fuel system for hours. It was a testament to his meticulous nature. "There you are," he murmured, pointing it out with the beam of his flashlight. Breaker leaned in, looked, and a slow smile of genuine respect spread across his face. "Well, I'll be damned." The repair itself was simple, but it required a part Elias didn't have. He could try to patch it, but it wouldn't be a permanent fix. His code wouldn't allow for that. "I can fabricate a seal that'll get you to the next major city," Elias said. "It'll hold. It'll be right." He went to his workbench, firing up a small torch. The hissing flame brought a welcome wave of heat. As he meticulously cut and shaped a piece of high-temperature gasket material, Breaker walked around the small office, his eyes taking everything in. He saw the stack of overdue bills. He saw the faded army commendations hanging in a cheap frame on the wall. And he saw the photo of Sarah. He stopped in front of it, his gaze lingering. "Your wife?" he asked, his voice softer than Elias had heard it. Elias glanced over, his hands never ceasing their work. "Sarah. She's gone." "I'm sorry for your loss," Breaker said, and the words were not hollow. They carried the weight of a man who understood loss. He pointed to a small, faded patch on the inside of his own leather vest, a simple set of initials and a date. "My brother. Roadside bomb outside of Fallujah." Elias stopped working. He turned and looked at Breaker, truly looked at him, and saw not a fearsome outlaw, but a fellow veteran. A brother in arms, bound by a different, but no less sacred, code. A shared history of service and sacrifice hung in the air between them, a bond far stronger than any difference in their current lives. "I was with the 101st, Elias said quietly. "Kandahar." Breaker simply nodded. Nothing more needed to be said. He understood the sleepless nights, the ghosts that lingered, the struggle to find a place in a world that no longer made sense. He understood the desperate need to hold onto a code when everything else had been stripped away. When the repair was finished, Elias reassembled the components with care. He fired up the bike, and it roared to life with a clean, powerful, perfect rhythm. The sound was a symphony of controlled combustion, a testament to a job done right. A deep satisfaction settled in Elias's chest, the pure joy of a craftsman seeing his work completed. It was a feeling more valuable than money, a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long, long time. Breaker revved the engine, a wide, genuine grin splitting his beard. "Like the day she was born," he boomed, the sound echoing in the garage. He pulled out a worn leather wallet. "What do we owe you?" Elias felt a pang of his usual anxiety. He should charge him the full rate, maybe even more for the emergency after-hours work. The money could keep the lights on for another week, buy another bag of coffee. But looking at the shared understanding in Breaker's eyes, he couldn't bring himself to do it. For a brother? Call it 50 for the materials. Breaker's smile faded. He looked at Elias, then at the pile of red-stamped bills on the desk. "No," he said, his voice firm. "That's not how this works. We pay our debts." He peeled off 3 $100 bills and held them out. When Elias hesitated, Breaker's expression hardened. "Take it. It's a matter of honor." Elias knew better than to argue with a man's code. He accepted the money, the crisp bills feeling foreign and substantial in his calloused hand. "Thank you." "No," Breaker said, pulling on his gloves. "Thank you." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. He looked back at Elias, his eyes serious. "The world's a cold place. A little warmth goes a long way. This isn't the end of it, you hear me? The iron serpents don't forget." With that, he and his men mounted their bikes and roared out of the lot, their taillights disappearing into the first flurries of the promised blizzard. Elias stood in the doorway, the $300 in his hand, and watched them go. For the first time in months, a small, fragile flicker of hope ignited in his chest. Maybe, just maybe, things were turning around. The hope lasted for approximately 7 minutes. That was how long it took for Mr. Henderson's luxury sedan to skid to a halt in the gravel lot, its headlights cutting accusingly through the now heavy snowfall. Henderson got out, a short, florid man whose expensive overcoat couldn't hide his pinched, mean-spirited nature. He stormed into the garage, his face a mask of theatrical fury. "What did I tell you, Thorne?" he bellowed, his voice sharp and nasal. Snowflakes melted on his shoulders. "What were my exact words about keeping this place respectable?" Elias stood his ground. "They were customers, Mr. Henderson. Their bike was broken." "Customers?" Henderson scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "That was a pack of animals. Thugs. I've had 3 calls already." Mrs. Gable down the street was terrified. "You're driving away decent people." "I'm a mechanic," Elias said, his voice dangerously quiet. "My job is to fix what's broken. I don't run a background check on a faulty carburetor." The quiet dignity in Elias's voice only seemed to enrage Henderson further. This was the moment he'd been waiting for. The bikers were just the excuse he needed. "This property is becoming a liability," he sneered. "An eyesore. I have plans for this corner, Thorne. Big plans. A new mini-mall. Something that will actually add value to this town." Elias's blood ran cold. He knew what was coming. "I'm terminating your lease," Henderson said, a triumphant smirk on his face. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his coat pocket. "An eviction notice. You've violated the terms. Morality clause. You have until the end of the week to clear out your personal effects. The equipment, of course, stays. As per our agreement, it reverts to me in lieu of the back rent you owe." Elias stared at the paper, then at the man holding it. The injustice of it was a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. He had poured his heart and soul into this place. It was his last connection to his father, to his past. "You can't do this." "I can and I have," Henderson said, tossing the notice onto the workbench. It landed next to the photo of Sarah. "Consider it a lesson in business. Sentiment doesn't pay the bills. Neither does coddling criminals." He turned to leave, then paused, his eyes falling on the $300 still clutched in Elias's hand. "I'll take that as a down payment." He snatched the money from Elias's grasp before he could react. "Have a nice life, Thorne." And with that, he was gone, his sedan spraying slush and gravel as it sped away. Elias stood alone in the garage. The flickering light finally gave up, buzzing once before plunging the space into near-total darkness, illuminated only by the cold, white light of the snow falling outside. He was unemployed. He was homeless. He had just lost everything. And the blizzard had arrived. The next 2 days were a blur of cold and despair. The blizzard raged, burying Havenwood in a thick blanket of white silence. The town shut down completely. For Elias, trapped in the powerless garage, it was like being buried alive. The temperature inside dropped to match the single digits outside. He huddled in his small office, wrapped in every piece of clothing he owned, the cold a constant, gnawing presence. The $300 that had represented a lifeline was gone, stolen by the man who was now casting him out into the storm. He had no food, save for a half-eaten bag of stale crackers. The water pipes froze, then burst, a final act of destruction. He sat in the dark, the silence broken only by the howl of the wind and the drip, drip, drip of his life's work draining away. He held Sarah's picture, tracing her smile with a numb finger. He had done the right thing. He knew it in his soul. He had upheld his code. He had shown kindness to a stranger, a brother, and his reward was ruin. The moral universe he had so staunchly believed in felt like a cruel joke. His integrity was all he had left, and it was a cold comfort against the encroaching frost. On the third morning, the storm broke. A weak, watery sun emerged, making the pristine snowscape glitter with a beauty that felt mocking. The silence was broken by the sound of a heavy vehicle. A knock echoed on the garage door. Elias, stiff and slow from the cold, pulled it open. It was Sheriff Brody, his face impassive. "Elias," the sheriff said, his tone flat. "Just checking on you." Henderson was worried the pipes might have burst. "They did," Elias said, his voice raspy. Sheriff Brody was not a bad man, but he was a creature of the town's ingrained hierarchy. He served the interests of men like Henderson, not men like Elias. "Listen," Brody said, avoiding eye contact. "Henderson feels bad about how things went down. He wants to make you an offer." Elias waited, saying nothing. "He knows you put a lot of your own tools and equipment in here over the years," the sheriff continued, shifting his weight. "He's willing to overlook the back rent, forgive the debt entirely. All you have to do is sign this paper saying you relinquish any and all claims to the contents of the garage and vacate the premises by noon today." It was the final, brutal twist of the knife. Henderson wasn't just taking the garage. He was trying to steal Elias's livelihood, the very tools of his trade, and dress it up as an act of charity. He was trying to buy Elias's dignity for the price of a forgiven, inflated debt. Something inside Elias, something that had been frozen and dormant, finally snapped. It wasn't anger. It was a cold, hard clarity. He looked at Sheriff Brody, a man sworn to uphold the law, now acting as a glorified errand boy for a thief. "You tell Mr. Henderson," Elias said, his voice low and steady, each word a perfectly calibrated gear clicking into place, "that my father taught me two things: how to fix an engine and how to know when a man is trying to steal from you. You tell him he can have the building, but the soul of it, my tools, my work, that's mine. I'll see him in court." The sheriff looked genuinely taken aback by the defiance. He sighed, shaking his head. "Don't be a fool, Elias. You can't win this." "Maybe," Elias said, a flicker of the old soldier in his eyes. "But I won't surrender." He closed the door in the sheriff's face, the click of the latch echoing his final stand. It was a hollow victory. He had no money for a lawyer, no place to go, and Henderson would surely have him arrested for trespassing by day's end. He had chosen honor over survival, and the bill was coming due. He began to slowly, painfully, pack his few personal belongings into a duffel bag, his movements heavy with defeat. He was so engrossed in his bleak task that he didn't hear it at first. But then it grew, the same sound from 3 days before, but amplified, magnified 100-fold. It wasn't a dozen engines this time. It was an army. He went to the window, his heart beginning to pound a frantic, unfamiliar rhythm. The sight that greeted him was breathtaking. Cresting the hill at the edge of town, their chrome gleaming in the morning sun, was a sea of motorcycles. 50, 100, maybe more. They moved with the terrifying grace of a cavalry charge, a river of black leather and steel flowing into the heart of Havenwood. At their head, riding the beautifully tuned machine Elias had saved, was Breaker. The Iron Serpents had returned. They didn't stop at the edge of town. They rode directly to Thorne's Auto and Repair, filling the street, blocking it from end to end. The town came to a standstill. Faces appeared in every window, this time not with suspicion, but with outright terror. This looked like an invasion. Elias stepped outside, his duffel bag forgotten. He stood alone in the snow as the legion of bikes cut their engines, plunging the street into a sudden, shocking silence. Breaker dismounted and walked toward him, his boots crunching in the snow. He stopped in front of Elias, his expression unreadable. "You look like hell, Thorne," Breaker said. "It's been a rough couple of days," Elias admitted. "We heard," Breaker grunted. "Word travels fast. Heard a man lost his business for showing us a kindness. Heard he was being thrown out in a blizzard." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the dilapidated garage. "The Iron Serpents don't like that. It's bad for our reputation." Before Elias could respond, a sleek black car pulled up behind the motorcycles. A man in an expensive suit and glasses got out, holding a briefcase. He walked briskly to Breaker's side. "This is Marcus," Breaker said. "He handles our business affairs." Marcus stepped forward and extended a hand to Elias. Elias Thorne, it's an honor. My associates and I are deeply indebted to you. He opened his briefcase. As of 8 a.m. this morning, our holding corporation completed the purchase of this property, Lot 4B, from a Mr. Gerald Henderson. He was highly motivated to sell. We also purchased the adjoining vacant lot. He handed Elias a thick folder. Inside was a deed. The property, free and clear, had been transferred to a new owner, Elias Thorne. Elias stared at the paper, his mind unable to process it. He looked up, speechless, at Breaker. "We told you," Breaker said, his voice a low rumble of satisfaction. "We pay our debts." But they weren't finished. A large flatbed truck, which had been waiting at the back of the procession, rumbled forward. On its bed was a collection of equipment that made Elias's breath catch in his throat. A brand-new hydraulic lift, a state-of-the-art diagnostic computer, a rolling toolbox the size of a small car, filled with every conceivable tool, all of them gleaming and new. "The bike you fixed," Breaker explained, his voice thick with emotion. "It didn't just belong to a fallen brother. It belonged to our founder, my father. You didn't just fix a machine, Elias. You honored a legacy. Our legacy." The club took a vote. "We're investing in a new regional service center for our members. And we want you to run it." Another biker stepped forward and handed Elias a thick manila envelope. Inside was a cashier's check for $50,000. The memo line read, "Operating capital." Another handed him a smaller envelope. Inside was $300 in cash. "For the coffee," the biker grinned. Just then, Mr. Henderson's car came screeching around the corner, followed by Sheriff Brody's cruiser. Henderson jumped out, his face purple with rage, ready to have Elias arrested. He stopped dead, his jaw dropping as he took in the scene. The army of bikers, the new equipment, the lawyer in the sharp suit. Marcus, the lawyer, turned to face him, his expression cold. "Mr. Henderson, I believe your business here is concluded. I'd advise you to leave the new property owner to his work." Henderson looked from the deed in Elias's hand to the sea of implacable faces staring back at him. He saw the end of his small-town tyranny. He saw the power he had so arrogantly wielded turned back on him 100-fold. Without a word, he scrambled back into his car and fled. Sheriff Brody just stood by his cruiser, watching, a look of dawning comprehension on his face. He was witnessing a fundamental shift in the town's power dynamic, a reckoning delivered on two wheels. The bikers didn't jeer or celebrate. Their victory was quiet and absolute. And then, a remarkable thing happened. They got to work. In a spontaneous, coordinated effort, they swarmed the garage. They tore out the old, broken equipment. They repaired the burst pipes. They installed the new lift. They ran new wiring and hung bright, steady LED lights that bathed the garage in a clean, warm glow. They were a whirlwind of productive, disciplined energy. It was like a barn raising from an old movie. Some of the younger townspeople, drawn by the commotion and impressed by the display, cautiously emerged. A few teenagers, who had always admired the bikes from afar, hesitantly offered to help. Elias, overwhelmed and humbled, put them to work, showing them how to organize the new tools. The wall of fear that had separated Havenwood from the outside world began to crumble, replaced by a bridge of shared labor and mutual respect. By sunset, the transformation was complete. The dilapidated garage was reborn. It was now Thorne's Iron and Auto, the name freshly stenciled above the newly painted doors. Inside, it was no longer a cold, dark tomb, but a bright, warm, and vibrant cathedral of industry. Breaker clapped a heavy hand on Elias's shoulder. "This is your house now," he said, "and you're one of us. You ever need anything at all, you have 100 brothers who will answer the call." Tears welled in Elias's eyes, hot and cleansing. He looked around at the bustling garage, at the men, bikers and townies working side by side. He looked at the gleaming new equipment. Then his eyes settled on his small desk. He walked over, picked up the silver-framed photo of Sarah, and wiped the dust from the glass. He hung it on the wall in his new, clean office, right next to his army commendations. She was smiling, and for the first time since she'd been gone, Elias Thorne smiled back. Months passed. Thorne's Iron and Auto became the most successful business in Havenwood. It was more than a garage. It was a community hub. The Iron Serpents made it their official stop, bringing a steady stream of business and a surprising amount of tourism to the once isolated town. Elias, now a respected business owner and a pillar of the community, hired and trained 3 young mechanics from town, giving them a future they never thought they'd have. The fear was gone, replaced by familiarity, and then by friendship. The menacing outsiders had become neighbors. One crisp autumn evening, Elias was sharing a pot of fresh, strong coffee with Breaker and a few other members in the lounge area he'd built. Laughter echoed in the warm, brightly lit space. He was no longer a solitary man struggling against the cold. He was surrounded by a family, a brotherhood forged not by blood, but by a shared code of honor. He had faced ruin for a simple act of kindness, for upholding his principles in the face of despair. And in return, the universe, in the unlikely form of a motorcycle club, had rewarded him with more than he had ever lost. He had found his home. He had found his people. He had found that true wealth was not measured in dollars, but in debts of honor paid in full. This story is a powerful reminder that the integrity we show when we have nothing is the truest measure of our character. If it touched your heart, please consider sharing it with someone who needs a little hope today. And don't forget to subscribe for more inspirational stories that prove kindness is never, ever wasted.